Hello and welcome to the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Owain and I'm joined by Dan. How's it going, Dan?
Yeah, good. Excited to bring this guest to you, but also excited because I've got the Barcelona half marathon on Sunday and I'm flying out tomorrow and looking forward to it to being a balmy. I think in the afternoon it's getting up to like 15, 16 degrees. I mean, I'm looking forward to that. That's
Yeah,
gonna be good.
different world to the UK at the moment.
Different world,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm just excited to go race actually. I've only done one race since Valencia. Get back on the roads. Try and go for a PB.
yeah, should be
So
good.
I'm not gonna put a time out there
No.
because I'll just get called up on it. But I'm confident that I can run. Hopefully a good size PB. I'm thinking,
Yeah,
but
and
we'll see.
I assume you'll have some saw gear on when you're in
I
Barcelona.
Absolutely, I'll have some saw gear on. And probably that's what reminds me. I think I need to put my saw shorts through the wash to make sure they're fresh and ready to go. I also did I'm enjoying tapering. Let's put it that way. I did an 8K run this morning, and it's cold out there. 2 degrees feels like zero. Do you want me to talk you through my outfit?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
for it.
So I went full saw this morning. So I had the saw socks on, really nice like checkered pattern, and come up like halfway up your calf, which is nice just to keep you warm. Uh, the saw are they race leggings or workout leggings? I can't remember.
I think they're session tights.
Session
So yeah,
tights, that's the one. I'm doing well here, aren't I? Session tights, which actually I'm a big fan of because sometimes they're a bit too warm, and these are like thinner ones. They've got different range of tights, and these ones are a bit thinner, so you don't cook, but keep you warm enough. And actually, they are really good for doing those sort of sessions in. And but again, you don't want to be just in shorts, but once you get going, you're going to be pretty warm. So I have them on my saw base layer. And then I had my saw windbreaker top on, which I've said about before, really big fan of. Just less sweaty than a jacket, like synthetic plasticky jacket over the top. So yeah,
yeah,
shout out to Saw, go check them out. Really, really nice stuff. And especially when their new spring colorways are coming out at the minute too. So they got an even better range of vests. So yeah, go check out Saw. Should we share about our guest today? Who have we got
yeah.
on?
So we have Andy Shaw.
Dr. Andy Shaw.
Dr.
Dr.
Andy
Andy
Shaw,
Shaw.
yeah.
Yeah.
He is the senior physiologist with UK Athletics. So an interesting discussion where we have UK Athletics physiologist and Dan, who is the Welsh Athletics physiologist. So two physiologists talking shop. But no, we had a really interesting chat with Andy. First of all, about his own research, mostly the research he did when he was doing his PhD. So a bit of a talk about just PhDs in general. I think, to be honest, that could probably be a whole episode, couldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Like what even is a PhD? What does that
Yeah,
involve? But yeah, I think we'll save that for another time. But yeah, got into a bit of his research on running economy, which is really interesting, and then sort of worked through what does a physiologist do if you're
yeah,
employed by UKA? What's your role? What is the role of a physiologist in general? Because actually, I think Andy went into quite a lot of detail in that it's not necessarily about just getting people in the lab, and obviously Andy does that, but there's so much more to it than that. And even just taking lactates from the field, I think he alluded to, it's much more about how do you interpret this data, education pieces, managing athletes through a training program, through a training cycle, getting them ready for championships. And I think he had some really good insights there, and I really enjoyed recording it.
yeah. It's not a case of just taking some lactate samples, is it, and saying, oh yeah, you're in shape. Oh, you need to do X, Y, Z. There's a huge amount of work going on in the background to
Yeah,
prepare athletes and coaches
yeah,
for the major events, which is really interesting. Hopefully, gives a bit of an insight into what goes on. Because we watch these events, but also I don't know, can we call ourselves like stakeholders? We part of our part of I guess like taxes and taking part in running like funds this as well. So we want to know sort of what's going on as well, which is like I was personally quite interested. Um, yeah, and some of the
You
behind the
don't pay
scenes.
tax. You don't. You're an ex-student.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm calling it fun employed at the moment.
Yeah, fun employed. I like it. You know what? I'm a bit jealous. Yeah. So yeah, our taxpayer. Yeah. So our taxes are paying for Andy's role. So yeah, it's actually his duty to come on, talk to us, and
Yeah.
share what he's been doing, isn't it? Really? Yeah.
We should have
No.
should have told him that. No, it was, I
Yeah.
think no, but we are, we're fans of the sport, and there'll be a lot of people listening that go to things like, the London Diamond League and support the sport. But you maybe only see what's happening at the London Diamond League or at the Olympics or at the World Champs, and there's so much else going on to prepare for that. And Andy has that insight, and yeah, is involved in yeah, shaping sort of what we then see as the end product, which is interesting to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's just good. I think it was just good that we can get someone who is working at the highest level, like supporting Olympic medalists, and is prepared to share like their insights and their thought processes and what they're doing to help support, yeah, the Keely Hodgsonsons and the Josh Kerrs, etc., to go and do what they do and be world class. I really yes, we really appreciated him coming on. But yeah, we'll stop talking now. You can go and enjoy the interview.
Hey, so we are joined today by Andy Shaw. Andy is Senior Physiologist at UK Athletics. He also has a PhD from Loughborough. I'm right in saying, did you do your master's and undergrad at Loughborough as well?
Yeah, I spent probably a vast chunk of my life studying in Loughborough. So,
Yeah. What was your PhD in, just out of curiosity?
so I looked at, well, a specific focus on running economy. So how it's measured, how we quantify it, and then sort of ways to understand it a little bit more. And then latterly in the PhD, how we can train it.
Yeah, and that's I think I don't know if you've listened to our podcast before, but we talk all the time about running economy and how to train it. Yeah.
I've
I'd be
got to put my
interested.
hands up and say it was a while ago now, so I'm not adding anything new to the field, but
I know I read something about like downhill running and whether that could train it, and I don't think you found that did anything, did it?
um, no, and that is probably the complexity of a running economy, and not to go into too much detail too soon, but it seems to be something that takes a while to change. And as any sort of studies do, like we managed to extend an intervention out for 11 weeks, which seems like a long time, but for something like that, it might
Yeah.
be more of a season long thing. Just some reflections on some of the more unique things that we've seen in coaching groups over a period of time, and downhill running seemed to be more of a sort of running specific strength focus as much as we can, and targeted that on some indoor training. So we turned the treadmill round and ran it in reverse, but on a gradient. So you're going downhill rather than uphill, and did some structured workouts. We started to see some changes, but there was no difference between that and just training normally in that sort of, and we were hitting sort of a tempo intensity. So both groups got better, but we didn't see a better performance in one or the other.
It's a hard one to focus a PhD on at running economy, I would say, isn't it? Would you agree? It's just so many, it's a reasonably easy to measure, but such a complicated, made up
Yeah,
of so many factors, isn't it?
it probably reflects at the time. So a bit of background of myself, when I first came into the sort of high performance sport area, it was doing the PhD with the UK Sports Institute, which is now the English Institute, or was the English Institute of Sport, sorry. And there were some questions from practitioners at that point in time that were some of the more complex and the pertinent questions to drive some of the sports forward. So there was topics around tapering, there was topics around altitude training. We initially were exploring a bit of training monitoring as well, because at that point, training monitoring in 2012 or 2011 was very different to what we do now. And it kind of morphed into a bit more of a focus on running economy over a period, because we were a bit more confident in some of the other measures that we had of the O2 max or some of the thresholds, but actually economy was a known component, but actually to be confident we were measuring the right thing, and then also to try and look at interventions to change it, Like if you looked at the papers at the time, I think it's probably still the same now, that there's a whole magnitude of things that can influence it. And it probably reflects it's just more of a complex um, piece of physiology, that it's so multifaceted that you can't just zoom in on a certain area and target that and change it. You have to take a bit more of a lens of it, where that sort of inefficiency is coming from.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I'll test an athlete in my lab, and their economy comes back as like poor, like really poor sometimes. And you go, okay, if I start listing off things that might improve it, and you go, well, probably run a bit more, maybe do some gym, maybe do some isometrics, maybe do some plyometrics, maybe do some strides, some high intensity running, some low intensity running, and then you've just listed everything that you could possibly do to improve anything. And you're like, well, what would I actually hang my hat on is going to improve it? I tend to fall back on just run more for more years and hopefully it'll get a bit better. But
yeah, and it's that echoes a lot of where review papers and general science has gone to, and again probably reflects it that to nail it down to a certain area to target to push forwards is really difficult. It was one thing we tried in through the course of my PhD. We utilized sort of uphill and downhill running to try and separate out two components of it. That the increased metabolic demand of going uphill might relate more to sort of muscle based, or at least sort of energy based inefficiency, whereas the downhill component, increasing that sort of transition of center of mass, it could sort of elevate sort of differences in the way that someone is interacting with the ground, for example, and how someone's economy is related to the energy return they're getting, but also that sort of force component. Unfortunately, although the concept was there, the reality was people changed here, there, and everywhere. So even in those two sort of settings, it didn't really help us target things more effectively. That probably is where it would have come, that if we could separate out people from that, we would have targeted more appropriate interventions and explored them. But actually it wasn't, and again, numbers notwithstanding, that getting good athletes to run up and downhill for an extended period of time is not something they want to do all the time. But having that focus of, okay, this is where the inefficiency is coming from and we can be targeted with your intervention, is just something we don't have. We've got the global measure, which is great, but actually that sort of piece that sits beneath it of, right, let's understand more of where that inefficiency is created, is something I think that we need to explore a bit more.
Yeah, and I guess someone, you might have two athletes with very poor running economy, but one of it might be more of a biomechanical limitation, I guess, and one more actually just physiological.
Yeah.
So do you think it's just a case of then just going, actually, where's your gap in your training? If you've not been doing any S&C, probably go and try that as a first point of call. If you've already been doing loads of it, then doing more is probably not going to make a massive difference. So maybe try something else.
Yeah, I think so. I think novelty is always an important component, and actually knowing what you've done in the past. I think actually, Dan, what you said about the consistency of something is another key thing, that over a period of time, it doesn't necessarily mean that introduction for 6 months is going to change it. It might be a longer thing. But also, I think we've got to be honest about the limitations of the measure. Like when we're talking about running economy here, and for wider listeners, that's very much running in and around, for most people, that 6-minute miling, first threshold kind of intensity. Whereas you've got the extrapolation of that for some athletes up to race paces that are sort of 4-minute miling and less. So we're making big assumptions there on what someone looks like at submaximal running to maximal running. So the application of this very much is, its purest level is marathon runners and individuals who are operating in that zone, and probably more applicable. Like the longer the duration, the more economy becomes an important thing. But holding our hands up and saying actually measuring race pace economy is beyond us at the moment, and something, again, I think if we understood that, we'd probably be in a better position too. And it does seem to be getting closer, that take our equivalent in cycling, they measure the power output rather than measuring the O2 cost or the oxygen exchange. There are technologies out there that are allowing power output to be quantified at a shoe level. I'm not saying that they're reliable enough or affordable enough or even at a position to roll out, but there is movement in that space. And I think once that's unlocked, it will help us understand a lot more of whether it's someone's power, where they're getting the power, the force transfer and things like that. So it might help a bit more, albeit people have the instrumented treadmills and we're still nowhere near answering some of that. So
yeah. Do you want to just, if you're all right, do you mind just breaking down for our listeners why you can't measure running economy at race pace? Why that's a poor way of assessing efficiency when we're talking about 1500 meter, 5k, even 10k race pace? Why can't we just stick someone on a treadmill there and measure oxygen consumption?
It's a really good question with it, and important to sort of highlight some of those areas. So when we talk about economy, we're talking about really the internal energy turnover. So in cycling, people might be familiar with the terms efficiency, and efficiency is very much the internal versus the external. So the energy turnover versus the power output. In running, as we said there, because we don't have the external measure of power, we've only got the internal measure of energy turnover. And the only way that we can measure that at the moment is from gas exchange. So how much oxygen someone's taking in, how much carbon dioxide someone's putting out, and then how much energy that individual is using to sustain a pace. The challenge we have in that area is because that's the only place that we can get an accurate quantification of energy turnover, it limits the intensities in which we can look at that. So as people transition from running easy to running slightly harder to that sort of top end, your body reacts differently to using that oxygen and creating carbon dioxide. So when you're below that first threshold, we can be relatively confident that oxygen uptake and carbon dioxide output is a good reflection of how much energy turnover there is in the body. As you start to transition up towards that second threshold, it still gives a stable picture, but there are differences in the way that your body operates to create a little bit more carbon dioxide, a little bit of drift in your oxygen consumption, that it's basically the final point in which we can get what we would deem an accurate estimate of oxygen or energy turnover at a muscle level. Beyond that second threshold, so for a 10k runner, a recreational 10k runner, that's sort of your 30-minute sort of mark. Anything above there is your body's having to work in a different way and taking, for want of a better phrase, a few shortcuts and creating carbon dioxide as a result of that. So the gases taken in and the gases produced don't marry up with the energy turnover anymore. And because we're reliant on that, that's where our end is for actually being able to estimate economy.
Yeah. Go on, Owain.
I think with running economy as well, and you mentioned cycling where you're able to measure like internal work and external work with power, but with running, like you said, there is some power meters coming, but you can't really measure it. So people just go by like look, don't they? Like you think there's some elite runners that don't look.
They look like
efficient.
They're wasting a lot of energy, don't they?
Isn't it?
But,
and I think that's a common pitfall, isn't it, with running economy, that I always think like Helena Beery always looks like, there's a lot going on when she runs, isn't there? There's a lot of but
upper body,
chances are she's probably quite economical because she's at the front of the Olympic marathon.
And it's a really good point. And again, going back a little bit of time, my PhD supervisor at the time, Jonathan Folland, took, I think, this a little bit further forwards and got some coaching feedback and sort of athlete overview of this is how someone runs. How does that equate to how efficient they are? And I don't think, as you said there, it was anywhere as simple as looking at someone knowing that they're a bit inefficient with the way that they're moving their upper body, or as a famous one would have, nodding their head, those kind of things would marry up. Actually, these individuals are finding a way to be efficient, and it is that piece of it, of it's how someone's interacting with the ground, and then how someone is returning the energy that they're putting in. And obviously now you've got the shoes that add into that, and that sort of elevates that sort of understanding there, that the shoes are probably changing the way that someone interacts with the ground and how they're returning that energy as much as they are creating that energy. So it's an example of where our understanding of economy is there, but it doesn't help because it splits everyone up again. So
nice. Well, that's a really good deep dive into economy there. Were there any other big outcomes from your PhD? Any highlights you'd like to chat about?
No, I don't think so. From the PhD side, we initially at that point my actual PhD title, when I signed up to it, was looking at training monitoring. And at that point in time, what we wanted to do was, there are events across disciplines that have the same duration of activity and the same maximal output, but the training behind it is very different. So initially it was the alignment of 1500-meter running, the 400-meter freestyle, and the team pursuit, all within that sort of remit of 4 minutes. And whether or not the training that goes into the background of those events, because some are gear locked, some are technique driven, and then you've got the weight bearing one of running, how we could understand the training behind it. Very, very grand idea, until we started trying to quantify training back in 2011, 2012, where technology just wasn't as friendly at that point in time to bring it to life. At that point, Bluetooth upload was not a thing. Definitely not to smartphones, and the accessibility of power meters was not quite the same on bikes. So it was a big manual task, and what we found quite quickly is that to get enough information in enough detail within one sport was not quite there, let alone 3 sports to then compare. I think if we tried to run it now, it would look slightly different, but even quantifying in detail swim training, for example, is still a bit of a challenge for those guys. So I think that was a learning curve of it. Actually, some of the fundamental bits that you assume are there are sometimes not. And actually our understanding of those training principles still needs to be taken forwards.
I remember having a Polar watch, being there for hours trying to infrared send things across to a dongle. It drove me insane. And even when I first started doing more sports science type work, like outdated Polars, you do a whole test with somebody trying to download the data, and then I just wouldn't want to play ball. You haven't got it quite aligned right, and Bluetooth is actually, it's simple like advances in technology like that, which actually make a massive difference. Not necessarily a Lactate Pro and all this sort of stuff. Obviously, that's beneficial too.
And training monitoring platforms, I mean, back then Training Peaks wasn't the same as what it is now. The integration of different apps and functions into a central database just wasn't there. So we were manually handling a lot of stuff in Excel and scraping it off the internet and downloading it. And I mean, it was an informative and this is where the sort of 2 aspects of a PhD, like for a scientific outcome, very limited, but from a process for us to take further forwards of how we're supporting athletes in and around training monitoring and understanding some of those components and what we might want to do, it was quite valuable. So from a research side, definitely no take home messages that are going to change the world. But from an understanding side, to help drive some of the things that we needed to put into the program, it was quite useful.
So your PhD was funded by VIS, is that right?
Yeah, so it was dual funded. It was the English Institute of Sport and Loughborough University. Yeah, so it was a dual-funded PhD between the two organisations. It was just set up at that time leading into the London 2012 games, so a bit more of a legacy kind of thing, and be able to take some concepts forward into Rio.
And then, so were you supporting athletes alongside your research at this point, or is it very much just a data collection, generate research, generate ideas kind of project?
At the time, we were very lucky. So I started my PhD with 3 other colleagues at the time, all of us from very different backgrounds, but come together to explore some topics that the English Institute of Sport Practitioners felt would be really valuable to take further forwards in the cycle. Was fortunate to work under some great practitioners at the time who were able to just provide us opportunity to support athletes and support them. So exercise testing within UK athletics at the time, and be able to support Barry Fudge, who was then the physiologist in position, to go up to British Cycling and help out with some of the testing there. We quite quickly picked up some of the other lab skills of hemoglobin mass testing, for example, which once you increase the capacity to deliver those tests across the network, it adds value everywhere. So yeah, we were very fortunate to touch in with some of those athletes at that time. As a young practitioner, seeing athletes prepare for London 2012, that was massive. And to have that insight of actually the athlete world and what it looks like from coming from, as we've said there, a legacy of Loughborough. So undergraduate masters, and then coming in to view what it is actually like for an elite athlete to train, it was eye-opening. And the roller coasters that come through it, and the reality of what it is. It's not just let's do something on paper and there's some robots at the end of it to just go out and execute the training. There's a whole host of things to consider within someone's life, within the yearly cycle, within the pressures, within relationships between the athlete, the coach, the staff around it, to consider that actually dictate some of that success.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's not just sometimes we're doing writing a good training plan is the easy bit, isn't it? It's actually often it's the life events, the life goings on that are the difference between being world class and not being world class, or Olympic gold and making a final.
Well, it's I think it's you've got to have the right formula, and it's got to be individualized. The training plan, and that's the key bit. The training plan is fundamental to anything. It's almost how you can get someone through the process of that training plan, and that's where coaching is, and that's what coaching is all about. It's people focused, and it's someone helping navigate someone else through that process, and that, I think, is the difference between the sort of programmer and a coach. That's the key.
Yeah, I think like in cycling, that line gets blurred a bit, doesn't it? And the physiologists are nearly are sort of prescribing the training as well. But then they'll have coaches which are more technical and tactical. Is that right? I mean, you probably know a bit more about cycling than me.
Yeah, and that's where it's there's a bit more in cycling where you can be prescriptive on things, and especially with the advancements in power and the remits that people take. I mean, the honesty it has to be is that there's a spectrum between a physiologist at one end and a coach at the other, that there is this middle ground piece of periodization, session setting, and the structure in which someone will progress through and hitting the right intensities, the right zones at the right time in the right way. It is fundamental physiology, and that's the bit that where coaches and physiologists meet in the middle. It's the decision to do the right thing at the right time. And that's not to say that a coach has a physiologist sort of mindset of I'm doing this because of real in-depth scientific understanding. Some definitely do. Some come at it from more of an experience and a feel side of things. And I've known on both sides. Cycling, there are more examples, but physiologists that get closer to that middle and take up that sort of coaching piece is quite common. It's just what direction people want to go down. Dan, you're probably the example of a physiologist taking his athlete sort of life to that sort of next level and self-prescription, but it's definitely a grey area, and I think that's part of being comfortable in those teams. You form the right role to support each other, and athletics looks slightly different than the way that we support coaches to what that would look like in cycling, but everyone knows, or hopefully everyone is comfortable in their own remit.
Yeah.
I think that leads really nicely on to sort of just asking what do you actually do at UK Athletics? I know that's a really, really massive question, but I don't know, maybe couple of your main sort of like roles and responsibilities, if you're able to.
Yeah, definitely.
And just as an add-on to that, I'd be really interested to know how that's changed from when you first started with UKA to the present day. So when was it that you finished your PhD and were employed by UKA?
I came into UK Athletics in 2015. So at the time I was doing a split role between UK Athletics and British Triathlon. So I worked for British Triathlon as their physiologist for 2 years, or no, 2.5 years. So in 2015 through to Rio Games and then into the championships the year after. And then I took on the full-time role within British Athletics at that point. UK Athletics, British Athletics, for want of a better situation, they're interchangeable in many ways. So my remit within UK Athletics now is, so I'm the senior physiologist that looks after the whole program. So I'm create and deliver the physiology strategy in the Olympic and Paralympic program, and then all of the events that come with there. So quite a broad scope, but then it very much does zoom down into most of the work and the delivery in the endurance program. So our able-bodied, or at least on the Olympic side of it, the program is quite wide, and then we've got an endurance program within the Paralympic program that's relatively small in comparison, but there's still some support and delivery that we give there. To say how that's changed, so back in when I first took the job, we were a bit more of a semi-centralized program, and not to go too deep in jargon, but by that in that we had a performance hub in Loughborough that was our national performance institute, and the encouragement of athletes to come and engage with support services in Loughborough and create that service delivery. So similar in other events, if you're cycling, the performance centre is centralised in Manchester. If you're rowing, it's centralised down in Caversham by Reading, just to create that athlete group and then the support staff there. We have moved away from that, so we are what we would deem as a decentralised system now. There's two pieces. One, COVID probably fed into that a little bit, of actually going back to being able to support people at home and the legacy that came from that. But there was the general understanding that we have to accept athletics is very much a group of events, that yes, we fall under the umbrella of athletics, but distance runners and throwers and jumpers and sprinters and every different event requires different things from different people with often different cultural thoughts, and the way that the events run and how someone interacts in those environments, that having one place for everything, it just didn't seem to tick all of the boxes. So we still maintain a footprint in Loughborough, that's our sort of central diagnostic hub, but then we've got other footprints around the country of the home nations, and then endurance hubs and sort of testing sites that are normally affiliated to universities that we also test out of. So work with colleagues to help deliver testing there, whereas the bread and butter of my job is very much camp delivery, and oversees environmental training camps and making the most of those opportunities and athletes being able to execute training whilst they're there. and then championship delivery. So preparing for championships based on the location and the environments that they're going to decide on or decided by World Athletics, and then the execution in the championships and managing recovery and those components as well of that sort of physical delivery. And then a lot of my time is then spent talking to coaches and athletes about the training that they're doing, the execution and the decisions that they're making in the field.
And I guess, is there, or what sort of, I guess, the difference between what you do at home and what you do, on training camps or at competitions? Because there's obviously going to be a difference, but yeah, what are maybe some of the things, I guess, just to give people a bit of an insight, like what sort of goes on for you at a major competition, maybe?
Or should we start? Can we start like what was going on at home and like build towards the competition? So I guess like in like the winter base training like period, so like October to January, I guess, or October to December, what's that looking like for you? What are your activities in that sort of period?
Yeah, so it, as you rightly said there, it does change through the year and the different focuses. So typically, if I just take the lens on endurance, because that's the predominant bit of my job, through that sort of October, November, December, people were just getting back into training after a summer championship. So it's very much supporting that transition back to running. So at that point in time, most people's focus is just developing what we would term that aerobic base, or just getting some miles back under their belt, and potentially doing an overseas training camp just to create a little bit of difference. So we structure some testing in and around there where we can. So by that, most of the time it would be a submaximal running assessment on the treadmill in the lab, just to get an idea of where baseline aerobic fitness is at that point in the year, because everyone's had a break, everyone's come back into training. It's more difficult at that point in time to know where you're at precisely, because changes come quite quickly week to week. So knowing actually, okay, I really need to, if I want to do the same sort of intensity as I was 3 months ago, I need to be running 30 seconds a mile slower. So especially for the younger athletes in program, that's a really good way to help understand where things are at that time of year. And then some field-based delivery where is appropriate, of just helping to check that intensity is about right for where they're sitting. So that's sometimes getting out there with your lactate analyzer and just sort of checking off the sessions, or just debriefing some of the work with the coach at that point in time. We've also at that time of year, and just to bring it to life a bit, a big change in our sort of setup and structure as well. So although we have the championships in the summer, when it comes to September, October, our program gets reevaluated of athletes' performances and who UK sport are going to support for that next block into the sort of next games, so that following year. So as well as physiology delivery, there's a connection with athletes that are come onto program that might not necessarily have been in that sort of setup before, and exploring, okay, where's the opportunities for those guys.
Nice. From you've just got back from a camp in South Africa then, so I guess that's the next. How does support differ when you're out in South Africa or other camps relative to at home?
Yeah, so camps for us it's a good opportunity for someone to introduce something novel. So and just to almost simplify it down, Dan, of the camps that we go on are to stress the body in a different way. So when we talk about going on a training camp, most of the time for us it's somewhere like altitude or somewhere like heat. So creating a novel environment for someone to really get a different hit from training, or at least amplify the responses of what that training could give. And I think my biggest role within that is to help a coach and an athlete navigate that new environment, because if if we're being honest, all of the athlete and coaches' experiences up to that point, and if they're transitioning up to a camp for the first time, has been at sea level in our conditions. And that's what you become used to. You know how to execute an easy run, a tempo run, a trap workout, what the paces need to be. Everything is calibrated to that environment. And then what we're doing is transferring an athlete and coach over to a different environment and saying, okay, do the same here, but more focused. And it's not an easy thing to do because the environment changes how someone interacts with the training paces and what someone's intensity profile looks like. So for myself, it's very much to help manage that process. So to give guidance on how to execute that intensity in a different environment, whether that's heart rate, blood lactate, session monitoring, to keep a dial in as well on recovery, because it's the other component of camps is that when you go away on camp, the majority of things that you can focus on is training because that's what you're there for. So quite often people's training load increases and the training intensity increases and the overlap with other athletes increases. So young athletes coming into it or inexperienced athletes joining in with very experienced and in our program sort of world medalists type of workouts, and how they get value from that, but how they're also respecting the recovery from that and getting the balance right. That ultimately the training camp is to push forwards performance, not to perform training on the training camp. So how you find that balance. So it's much more of a hands-on thing on camps. We get much more of a day-to-day contact with the athletes that we don't get from the ground, being a decentralized system. So working with coaches and athletes just to help that decision making, really.
Yeah. Do you see it as primarily like just managing training load, intensity control kind of purpose? I sort of feel that camps can either one of two ways. You either get really fit or you just get in a hole, get overtrained, fatigued, especially when you said you've got a young athlete training with world and Olympic medalists. Like, it's easy to get carried away, over motivated, and even with the increased recovery time, just end up actually getting tired and not necessarily adapting to that training you've been putting in.
Yeah, and I think the alignment with sea level and where it comes back to where I think the role as a physiologist sits is it's just helping people to make good decisions. What we provide is context. We provide information that people can use to help their decision making. And that looks slightly different at home because people are more familiar with those decisions. When you go overseas and you go to somewhere that's a new, that is high, that is hard, that is something that they're not experienced with, it's helping a coach and an athlete through that process of making those decisions. And that's not to say that information is the same for all athletes and coaches. It's trying to find the right thing that you can support people with on the right day. And some things at the start of the camp might not necessarily look like the most important thing in the world, but by the back end of the camp becomes a very important thing. So how people are negotiating that, and they're making good decisions about how fatigue is building up through the course of that camp, how the general intensity is coming, how they're being able to execute their training, because doing one or two sessions too hard is not going to be the be all and end all, but doing most sessions too hard at the back end of the camp it is. And I think this is the biggest learning that all athletes go through, is the harsher environment you go into, the less room there is to make mistakes, and that's the difficulty with it. The higher, the hotter the places to go. If you're not making good decisions around your training, you get caught out quite quickly. And as you said, Dan, it's not just like, oh, we haven't got the most from the camp. Is some people come back and they've really pushed themselves too hard that they have to come back for a season reset. And that's something that we're trying to help people negotiate, that it might be their first camp, but how do we give more information to facilitate that learning? Because what we don't want it to be is just a sort of trial and error process. You go here, we'll just try something, and then we'll come back and we'll see at that point how it's gone. Because an athlete's career is not long enough for people to go through all of that trial and error on their own. So for us to help facilitate some of that decision making, accelerate some of that learning is exactly where we need to be.
Yeah, so you've talked about like monitoring sessions in terms of heart rate, lactate, RPE. In terms of like just the overall training load they're under, so looking a bit more like chronically, like for example, a 4-week camp, or just actually even like over the course of a winter. How are there ways you're going about trying to quantify how well an athlete is tolerating that load and whether they're doing too much or too little? Or is that more the role of the coach?
Yeah, and I think that's probably the reflection of where we're the athletes that we're working with. So, for example, the camp that we've just ran in South Africa, it's very much international standard athletes that have quite an established level of load. So the changes in load are not quite as dramatic as you would get in some other areas. These are experienced athletes that have been to those conditions quite frequently. It is still helping make decisions of including things at the right time, because each year, although it looks similar on paper, it's very different. So whether they're building towards indoors, whether they're building towards road on the outdoors, and how they're managing that load through there. Each of the coaching setups and the athletes have different ways that they quantify their own load. So some will use training peaks, some will use Excel files, some will use paper files. It's just how they will operate. But we try and encourage a sort of structure of how to hit those camps dependent on the conditions. So for those going to high altitude, for example, what you do in the first 5 to 7 days is very different to what you can do in that sort of third week once your body is adjusted. So there is load management in a way of the integration to the camp, but very much from how your body is physically adapting to the conditions that you arrive to. South Africa slightly different, because part of the hit of South Africa is the heat, and we get a bit of altitude response from where we go, which is about 1400 meters. But the way that your body responds, it doesn't take quite as long to adjust to those initial altitude conditions. Yes, the heat, it will take a little bit longer, but the nice thing about heat is you can kind of dip in and out of it in the day. If you change your training time, you can change the temperature. Change the training time, you can't change the altitude. So one of them you have to respect in a different way to the other. So going into those camps, that first week of a lower load, progressing the load and the intensity into the second week, into the third week, and then backing off of that load into that final week. It's often the piece where people want to push, but ultimately you're not going to change the world with one last session, but you've got to travel home the next day, and how your body responds to that. And you want to get home and you're not carrying something that then puts you back into indoors. So just making sensible decisions around that.
So you're not strapping Whoop bands to everybody and measuring stress scores and heart rate variability and all these other black box numbers that are spat out.
Not sort of athlete wide, and that's not to say some of the athletes don't see value in it. And this is the piece of it, is some of the technology has made a big leap forwards from where we were before. And like there's some good metrics that you can measure with quite a lot of ability to interpret it. So morning heart rate variability, those kind of measures have a pretty good scientific grounding to help inform some decision making. The combined metrics of training stress scores and readiness scores and recovery scores are a bit more of a joined up approach of multiple different scores that seem to align in the center, but the validation of those things are quite small. And that we are in a much better place, where beforehand we either had things that didn't measure something very well but you could wear it all the time, or did measure something very well and it was very uncomfortable to measure all the time. So with some of the rings, with some of the watch straps, with some of the other things, you do get a bit more of a detailed insight. It's just what people are looking at and what they want to pull from that. some of it is good behavioral encouragement that I wouldn't necessarily read into all of the pieces around recovery. But if someone is aware of their recovery and their recovery score is down and it promotes better recovery that day, that's never a bad thing.
Yeah.
And if people are spending time off feet or protecting sleep, all of these things, actually that is quite a positive thing. What I'm not a big fan of is, and we're definitely not there yet, is the units don't give a green light, an amber light, or a red light of whether you're ready to train that day. You'll have people present in the morning that feel like they're really struggling with a build-up of fatigue and they don't know what to do that morning, and they'll go and hit a workout that is so far beyond what they expected that actually the performance was there. And you'll have some people that wake up that feel great and actually that session in the morning doesn't go to plan. And that's not to say some of the metrics of that we've mentioned before aren't important to keep a monitor of and to help that decision making, because you wouldn't want to do that all of the camp. If someone's consistently feeling rubbish but performing well, that's a flag. And if someone's feeling great and performing rubbish, that's another flag. But I don't think those measures can pull it apart quite yet.
Yeah. So just being a bit more holistic and taking all the data points and seeing what performance is like. But It sounds like it's very much an individual athlete by athlete process of what they are measuring and not measuring. It's not like a systematic UKA wide approach, which makes sense, I guess, in terms of different types of athlete. They have their psyche, and I guess that's like a sponsorship and brand affiliation comes into it as well, doesn't it? Right.
Yeah, and I guess that's slightly different from us to the pro teams, is we don't have big brand affiliations. Everything that we do is on an individual basis and on merit. So if we found something that we sincerely believed that was accurate, that was going to add value, and an athlete could take to their home environment and be able to execute as well, we would probably be using that, cost within a certain remit in that sort of space. But everything else is trying to address the individual needs of the athlete. So if we are looking at an athlete who's under recovered, for example, that is something that we would explore in more detail. It is the braver part of training that I seldom see elite athletes that aren't able to push themselves to the very limit, but actually being brave enough to recover as much as possible. That's the harder bit, because humanly we want to do more. Like, we think more is more, and at a certain point more is not always more. And so finding that balance is something that we try and help with.
Have you seen a sort of change in I guess maybe willingness to engage with you over the years you've been in the role? As I don't want to necessarily put it down to them, but people like the Ingebrigtsens are taking a more, I guess, systematic and I don't want to say evidence-based approach, but there is more data driving what they're doing. Are things like that maybe driving more engagement for you, or maybe not?
It's a really interesting one to think about, and I think it comes down to the way that people view it, and that's probably part of it. As there are groups out there that are creating a lot of data, whether or not, like, this is the difficulty with all training, is when people are saying they follow the evidence, of actually our evidence and understanding of what it is to knit together an elite athlete's training program is quite challenged. Like, we know different components and how training sessions will give an individual response. Put that together as 4 weeks of an elite athlete, and that looks very different. But what has, I think, promoted it's positively promoted the conversation of what data are we actually collecting, and I think that's where the engagement piece comes in. Is it has encouraged a lot more people to be using handheld analyzers to measure blood lactate, for example. But again, that's data collection, and it's the interpretation of that, of where we can come and add some value to it. Anyone can collect the information, but actually knowing what to do with it, and that's the hidden piece of those groups out there, is it's not them doing the testing that's going to be pushing them forwards. It's knowing how that testing aligns with those individuals, because even in those groups, and even the group of three brothers, like how it would influence one to the next is very different. So I think it's opened up a mindset of, okay, maybe we should be viewing everything. It's not to say that we need to be collecting all the information, but there might be some key bits at key times of the year that enhance our decision around certain sessions. So for those doing double thresholds, yeah, it's definitely increased the amount of people that are using blood lactate monitors. And it's opened up some of the conversations, but it's difficult for me to reflect on in that piece, because the engagement is very much as well about the relationships and how you've got that development with the athletes, at least within our program. And for me, being in there longer, you naturally have different conversations to when you did at the start. But there is definitely a more data-driven practice that's appearing around quite a few of those endurance sports.
I guess is another thing that changed just because handheld lactate analyzers have been around forever. We've been measuring lactate forever. Is it actually, do you think, I guess from when you started out as a practitioner to now and then going to the future, do you think the challenge is going to come more from actually, or the role is going to switch more to data processing and actually filtering out like what is good and bad data, and then like the interpretation size, and less of getting people in a lab and testing them? Just become more, like a data, I guess is the question. Is it becoming more of a data management and data education and interpretation role, rather than we're going to go out and monitor an athlete and take their blood samples because because now they're doing that. A lot of athletes are doing that every session by themselves. It's just knowing how to use that data and combining that with other data streams, whether that be psychological or heart rate variability, etc.
Yeah, and I think it's that point there, Dan, that's the really key one, is how it aligns with everything else. And that it's that thing, as technology goes forwards, it's not necessarily a data management side, because with tech going forwards, the databases and the integration and things go forwards. I think, and I've definitely seen it in a few sports, you get to a point where you've got so much data that then what you do with that and how you interpret it isn't quite in the way that you envisaged it to start off with. And that's what, at least from an outsider's perspective, watching the development in power in cycling, the initial thought was, if we collect all the power, we're going to be in a very strong position. And then you've got all the power, and now you're trying to figure out what to do with all that information and how to inform practice, because ultimately it has to be clear and concise information to make good decisions. And you kind of get dragged one way or the other. You've got then so much information that's influencing so much of your decision making that it's not making it any clearer of which bit is actually the important piece. And I think that there is definitely a sort of interpretation side of things, but I think if I can explain it, that the bit that I see there is not necessarily a data management piece or a data processing piece, but an educational piece of taking that bit further forwards. That's where my role changes each time, is when something else emerges, there is an existing practice that emerges with that piece of technology or that way of testing, and it almost becomes accepted in some areas, but you don't understand the rationales behind it, or the way that someone is using it, or the way to get the most from it. And that's where I see my role coming into it, is helping that educational piece of, right, are you actually really understanding what this number says? Of, if we're measuring blood lactate, like, are you searching for an absolute value? If 2.5 flashes up, what are you going to do? If that then changes to 4, what are you going to do? If that then changes to 5.7, where are you going to go with that? And what was the purpose of the session? What are you trying to execute in that sense? If you turn up the next day and that's then 3.5 to start off with, are you going to make a different decision? And that's the bit with it, is I think the technology creates accessibility, which is great, but there's few things with the accessibility that come with the information of this is exactly what you need to do with it. And that I have to be brutally honest, in quite a lot of areas, technology companies want to sell more products, and they're going to do that by making it sound very good.
Yeah.
And that's
I guess
where
that was going to be a follow-up question for me, is actually there's so much emerging tech, and obviously each company's got an investment to sell it. How do we know what is good tech and what is bad tech? And what are there when you're talking to an athlete and they're saying, oh, I'd like to get something to measure my heart rate variability, would you go, oh, I would recommend using this and not that? Would you go, right, yeah, use a chest strap in the morning, or use an Aura ring or whatever brand, and don't use a Whoop band or whatever? I don't know. Because it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? Like you can't, I imagine you haven't got the capacity to go and screen every new bit of kit that appears on the market and go, yeah, this seems to be valid, or this is, yeah, we can't validate this bit of equipment, for example.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, and something that's not easy at all. And I think the important place to start is we sort of arbitrarily draw that line of whether a piece of kit is good or bad, whereas the reality is everything is on a spectrum, and every piece of technology has a limit and limitations that come with it. And even when someone comes into our labs, like, we control the environment as much as possible, but our labs can only measure things in a certain way, to a certain level of accuracy and to a certain level of reliability. The reality is anything that's more portable, it's going to introduce a little bit more error, at least compared to what we can do in the lab. And it's how much confidence you can have in those measures and what type of behavior you're trying to change in those measures. So in some areas you'll accept more variability and more things if it's a behavioral change that's still having a positive impact. If you're making big decisions off of a key piece of data, you want to be more certain that data is telling you exactly what it is. And look, there's recent studies that portable handheld lactate analyzers, they all tell something slightly different. There's a recent paper, and it was only published last year. Even the two lab analyzers that we have in many of the labs over the country, they tell something slightly different. They're consistent, but there's something slightly different. So it's how you're using that information. So yeah, in an ideal world, if you want to measure something like heart rate variability, you use a chest strap or something that's attached to the chest that you're measuring electron signals directly from the heart to get a clear picture of that. But if that comes at the cost of someone not doing it very often, then that's the trade-off with it, of something like the Aura ring or the Whoop band, that you get a consistency of data, but it's how accurate it is and what you're trying to decide off of that.
Yeah.
And if you're using a Whoop band to just make sure that you're remembering, and I mean that in inverted commas, just checking in with yourself regularly about your recovery, then it's probably good enough to do something like that. If you're measuring it because you want to know exactly your heart rate variability, you're probably looking in the wrong place for it. But it's also questioning why people would want to zoom in such detail in some areas based on the question that they have. Like if you're really looking at heart rate variability and that's exactly what you want to measure, I would guide people towards something. If it's just, right, we're starting here with someone that's a university student that is struggling to manage some of the commitments in and around their thing, and they, I don't know, as I'm going to sound old with this, they like to do the online gaming at night and don't switch it off, and actually behavioral reminders to just engage with recovery, that's something that might be applicable. So it's probably quite strange coming from someone with a very scientific background that some things that aren't necessarily the most scientifically valid can still have the impact, but it depends on what question you're asking.
Yeah. No, yeah, I guess, yeah, your message here is it's context dependent, and it's also what level of decision are you making based on that data. I'll be, yeah, like you said, if I've got someone if I'm see a lab test and the data that comes out of that with a Vintus and a Biosyn, so like a lab grade lactate analyzer, and I'm comparing that to a field-based assessment where I've got some sort of portable gas exchange system and a lactate pro. Well, I'm gonna have more confidence, have a better, feel like I can make a better decision based off the lab-based data. But that's not to say that the field test is worthless. It's just going to give you a different level of accuracy, and you can make different level of decisions. Like for a handheld I think the handheld lactate analyzer definitely have a place. And like you said, when you're monitoring a training session, they're effective, and you can make a good enough decision based on that data to amend the session or increase or decrease the intensity. But you're not going to change a whole training block based on one test from the field.
No,
is that fair?
I'd agree with that. And it's also knowing the limits of stuff. So when we're talking about the handheld analyzers there, it's very much, if you're doing controlled hard workouts, it will give you an insight into be able to make decisions. So in that sort of tempo intensity, threshold intensity, you should get a reading that can help add value to know what's going on in the session and how much that session has taken out of you. Less confident if you're doing a 3K workout on the track of what that absolute value tells you. And that's the key bit about the education and the information, is knowing where something can have impact and where something can actually add value, and where something is probably beyond our current remit of understanding, even within a controlled context, let alone within something that's slightly less accurate.
Yeah. Owain, do you want to take us in the next direction?
Yeah. I mean, I was sort of interested in, I guess, what would be, or if I wrote this down as like, if the next Keely or Josh Kerr comes through, appears on the scene and comes onto the UK athletics program, what would maybe be some of the components of like an ideal sort of service that you would want to offer them? Like what, or maybe that person comes along, what are they getting from UK athletics, just to sort of give people an idea of some of what's going on in the background.
It's a very good question, and more of I guess a way of how our support team operates rather than a discipline specific side of things. It's the way that and the reality of athletes that come on to our level of support and direction is they're already competing at that international standard, that there is already an experience behind them, and there is a team behind them. That there's very few athletes that come as just an individual. That there's at the very minimum an experienced coach that's been working with them, or a coach that's taken them through, and then practitioners that they've engaged with for that period of time. So what we try our best to do is, we're not sort of a transactional service that you turn up and here's British Athletics and there's a physiologist and an S&C coach, a biomech, a sports psych, therapy doctor, whatever. There's your menu, what do you fancy? And then we go from there. It's working with them, of understanding from the base level of where that performance gap is going to be. So from that basis of, right, this is where you are now, this is where you want to get to, and these are the things that you feel that you need to have in place to get to that point. And unpicking with them sort of, okay, well, have you thought about it in this way? If you're trying to explore this in this area, if you're trying to bring it to life, if you're trying to explore speed development, okay, what does speed development look like? Are you talking about top end mechanical speed? Are you talking about speed endurance? Where does it present in your training? What are you seeing in training at the moment that's telling you that is an area that you need to work on? How does it present in racing? To then take a step back from that and understand it more and say, okay, well, this is where these components could be coming from. This is what you've got in your program at the moment, and this is where we can sort of support you to explore further. And within a physiology remit, that might be the session execution, the training environment side of things, the altitude side of things. It might be from a conditioning side of things, that people come onto the program and they hadn't had the fortunate thing of engaging with an S&C coach and having that programming that's aligned to specific distance running and different focuses, nutritional support, psychology support of managing as if you're sort of taking those examples there of the next world leaders, is the expectation, the pressure, and the environment that creates around you, and how do you manage that from a psychological perspective, and how do people keep that going? Because there's one thing to do it for 1 year, there's another thing to do it for the next year and the next year and the next year, and pressures change and expectation changes, and the way that you view training changes, and the way that people interact with you in training changes. Like, you go on training camps and everyone wants to train with you and be part of your group and do those things. So how do you manage that? So it's a broad way of saying it's very, very individual, but that's because these guys and girls are very much making those fine margins to make that next step. For the next tier down, I would say, from like the future side of things, and my experience of working with previously what was Virgin London Marathon, of supporting athletes in that space, there's some bigger rocks to explore at that point in time, that actually some fundamental things around testing and training execution and knowing how to hit those intensities in workouts and those kind of things would be some of the fundamental things I would explore from physiology as like a general thing, to then progress to those final bits of sort of year-round altitude processes planning, championship execution.
That's really good. It's just about, I think a lot of it is just about being systematic, isn't it? And looking at what are you currently doing? What are you missing from your training? What do you think your weaknesses are? How are we gonna get them better and maintain your strengths? Would you say?
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to do. And that's the caveat with it. And the thing that I openly say, it's not something that you can guarantee you'd always get it right. It's the bit around having or at least I'd feel that the engagement with an institute provides you is creating more detail around those questions, that you know that you need to improve in one area. I mean, ultimately, from a distance running, you just scale it back. You've got to run quicker, or you've got to run quicker at a certain period in the race. That it's a very simple thing to do, but a very difficult thing to know how to make that next step. And especially in certain events where you're combining some of the speed characteristics with the endurance characteristics, and you've got the 800, the 15, and steeplechase, for example, all of those events that come with unique challenges, that it's how you manage that. It might be when you get to the 5:10 marathon, it's not necessarily of the knowledge of how to push forwards in terms of training, but how do you manage training? Because the training required to get you to a sub 2:05 marathon, it's going to be a lot of training, and how you making those steps up to your body being able to tolerate that, and the process behind that. And that's not an easy answer. And so what we try and create is a system where there is a rounded level of expertise, but not a direct question that goes to a direct person. It's almost things that sit in the center and go, right, this is going to be so many different things that feed into this to be able to execute this. It's everyone taking a little bit of ownership of, okay, it could be this, and it could be this, and it could be this, and feeding that back into the coach as a package, and the athlete to then say, right, this is where we feel we can support you going forwards. Some have their own setups, and it's very, very light touch. Some have a much more engaged process in and around UK athletics. It's just how we work.
Yes, really, really interdisciplinary, which I don't know about Loughborough, but at Cardiff Met at least, that was something that is sort of constantly hammered into you, at least in the master's program that Dan and I did. Like, there's always talk about interdisciplinary, but then within research it's quite siloed, isn't it, often?
Yeah.
And even like we're doing it now on our podcast is physiology, so we're I don't know, part of the problem was we're focusing on one bit. But yeah, it is that interdisciplinary approach, which is not necessarily what you see from the research as much.
Yeah, and the interdisciplinary bit is, I think some people get bogged down with the sort of buzzword or buzz term around it. I mean, the reality of everything is just it's very complex, and I think what comes into the multidisciplinary side of things is each ability for an athlete to take a step forwards to that sort of top level becomes ever more complex. Like there's some things that seem simpler at the time. If Dan, you started training me as a distance runner, I'm pretty sure you could set me a training without even seeing me and be confident I would make strides further forwards. You don't get that luxury when you're working with the individuals that are trying to take, as a female 1500 meter runner, how do you make the strides forwards from being a 355 runner to a 352 runner? Like the margins are very, very small, and the things that are new and to train and to take further forwards are quite small as well. So the question just becomes more complex. And when the question becomes more complex, having a better rounded team around you to make sure that you're exploring it in the right ways to then go, okay, right, this might be the limiting factor. And again, probably relates back to our conversation around running economy. Taking one lens on it, you'd only get one answer, and you get some people not changing, some people probably getting worse and some people getting better. Whereas if you've got multiple different lenses of different pieces of that puzzle, then you've got a better chance of actually supporting someone to make that gap achievable.
Yeah, it becomes increasingly harder as you get closer to your capacity, less stones to unturned and interventions you can put in place, I guess.
Yeah.
Should we I was wondering if we could, I don't want to take up all your afternoon, Andy. So I was wondering if we could just go for a few quick fire questions, if that's all right. So this is ones I'm making up on the spot, and so Owain, feel free to chip in. So favorite athlete to work with over the years?
That's an impossible one.
Like choosing your favorite child, is it?
Well, yeah. That's the admit. I've been very, very fortunate to work with some incredibly good people, and I think that's the nicest thing as an undergraduate looking at elite athletes. That you're kind of like, Jesus, these are almost heroes in many ways, and getting to know them as people, like they're still people that you can admire, but there's so many people that you can relate to, and they're just really normal people. So yeah, it's nigh on impossible on that one.
Yeah, so you're not going to give us an answer there. That's fine. So do you want to so you used to be a runner. Do you want to run us through your PBs if you can remember them?
Oh God, no. I'm very flattered that you said I used to be a runner. So
well, you still run a bit. I've been told.
I got into running in lockdown. Self-admittedly, I came into athletics very much as someone that loves science and loves sport, but not as an athlete. And I went on a training camp and got dropped by a coach in his mid-50s and thought, well, that's not something I can really take further forwards into life. I should invest a bit more here. So in lockdown, me and one of my colleagues gave us a bit of a focus to do some more training. So I managed to tick off a sub 90 half marathon, which I think I ran about 85, which I was quite happy with.
Well, that's more than a sub 90, right? It's comfortably under.
And I always wanted to do the sub 5-minute mile, but my body was never really at an age where I could tolerate some of that training anymore. I'd stopped playing football because my body was glass, and then I found that running at that intensity made my body like glass again. So I stopped that. But
yeah, nice. Favorite training camp location?
I think just because of its prestige and the time of year that we go, it's hard to find a nicer place to go than St. Moritz. I've been fortunate to go with triathlon. I've been fortunate to go with athletics. There in the summer, I'd love to go in the winter to see what it's like, but being in the Swiss Alps of a summer you can't really find too many nicer places.
I guess last one for me then would be which athlete or performance do you feel like the most proud of, is, and you felt like you really contributed to making that athlete run faster or achieve what they achieved? I guess it doesn't have to be like the one who achieved the highest level, like, you know, Olympic gold or whatever, but actually made the biggest. You felt like you had a really good impact there.
I mean, that's a really good one. Off the top of my head, and just things that spring out. One of our bigger challenges, and one of the most challenging championships we delivered at was Doha in 2019. And actually supporting those road guys and girls to be able to execute away from the track. Track was okay because it was air conditioned. The road events in Doha were challenging. And it was a whole spectrum of individuals, some with a lot of pressure to perform, some that had had some pretty challenging experiences in heat in recent times. So actually supporting those.
So we're talking
guys.
Callum Hawkins here, are we, with
Yeah,
Gold Coast collapsing and then ending up fourth, right? Doha, was he?
Yeah, and being able to support through that process of really going back to fundamentals and giving people confidence of being able to perform in those environments. And as a physiologist, as I've said previously in this, my from a sole thing of like training execution side of things, that's very much a collaborative thing, and environmental preparation is, but I feel more responsible for some of that. So actually to see some of it, and that's not to say we got it right in all instances, because I think again individuals in individuals places managed it differently, but there were some performances there that I was particularly proud of.
And Joe, I thought of one, and it was going to be what was the most interesting sort of major competition you've supported, but I imagine Doha would be the answer there anyway.
Yeah, I mean yes, I mean if we're going to talk about interesting one, Doha would feature up there, but Tokyo in 21 was a different level. And I can only take my hat off to the athletes and how they managed that lockdown process to turn up to the championships and deliver as they did, because that's unique, and it's not something that any, like as I'd said before, like athletics and people's delivery is very much trial and error. You learn things, you take things further forward. There was nothing that people could learn before you go into something like Tokyo that would prepare you for something like Tokyo. And the isolation and the individuality of some of the things that had to happen out there because of people falling ill or getting pinged by contacts of on planes and those kind of things, to negotiate that was really, really difficult, and posed the whole team a different challenge that they'd never really experienced before. So yeah, of all of the memorable ones, I think that would stick there.
So you're looking forward to going back to Tokyo in less challenging conditions?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, there's I think that the bit that we didn't get to experience was Tokyo. Ironically, we got the conditions, we got the stadia, we got the infrastructure, and we got those bits, but we didn't get to experience the people of Tokyo and what that would feel like. And I think from like actually a long time has passed, at least in terms of athletic time, that we're visiting 4 years later. So some athletes that would have experienced that environment won't be coming back this time, and it will be new for some to experience. But yeah, there's a familiarity with it. It's obviously going to be something for me to support in many ways, because it's still going to be hot. Japan is always hot and humid at that time of year, so there's the challenges of those sides of it. But it'd be nice to get a feel of what it would have been like.
Yeah, I think Japan as a whole massively missed out with the Olympics. Like I'm sure the world champs already did such a good job of organising it.
Yeah,
but I didn't. Hopefully, there'll be some redemption for and a stadium with no fans in it, and really probably not capitalising financially on hosting the Olympics either. So I'm personally looking forward to watching it.
Especially from Japan has a really big culture and heritage around marathon running, and that's really exciting for the guys out and girls out on the roads, is that support and what that will look like. And I think that was probably the one that got hit even more so in 2021. We flew to a different island that really wasn't ready for it, and it wasn't quite the experience even of a big city marathon, let alone a championship marathon. So I hope that group in particular get that feel of it.
Thanks. Any last questions, Owain?
I think that was it for me. Yeah,
I've got one
thank
more.
you.
Sorry, I've got one more to sneak in before we go. One to watch. Who's the athlete to watch? Who's gonna surprise us this summer on the track or the road?
This is the thing, and being honest, the ones that have, there is so much potential within that team to take it further forwards that it could be any of them really. I mean, we're very fortunate. We've got some really talented young athletes coming through, some that have already challenged on the major scales and have a medal to their name. Others that have taken a step forward last year. And then this is the exciting bit about athletics is if you'd have asked me the same question at the start of last year, I wouldn't have been able to give any names, and I definitely wouldn't have been able to predict what have come. Like some of the athletes that have taken a step forwards last year into being global medalists, that is rewriting the way that we think of some things. But yeah, again, much like your first question, that I can't nail it down to one person. I just think we're in a very, very fortunate position at the moment in athletics that we, even compared to sort of 10 years ago, the individual talent that's in there is exceptional. And medals from different disciplines, whether that's sprints, jumps, throws, road, track, middle distance, there is potential pretty much everywhere. So
yeah, should be an exciting summer to see what the Brits can do. Certainly seem to be punching well above our weight at the minute, and across certainly the middle distances. And I'd personally love to see some more success in the 5-10 marathon, but like we just said at the start, challenging spaces to be part in.
But we've seen some young athletes over the winter perform extremely well, and it only, I think it's these kind of things. It takes one or two to sort of break the door, and then it gives other people belief that they can sort of push through behind them. So look, we've got Euro indoors, we've got World indoors, we've got European roads to look forward to. So yeah, I think everyone's got a nice opportunity this winter to really perform at the top level.
Yeah, exciting. I'm probably doing a bit of a disservice to Emil Caress, who finished fourth at the Olympics, to say we're not doing well on the roads. But before I just can imagine the comments coming in on our Spotify channel if I didn't mention that. But yeah. So Andy, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights from UKA and your research as well. So thanks very much, and good luck for the rest of the summer, I guess, and getting people ready for champs, indoors, outdoors, Olympic, world champs, and have a good one.
No, thanks, Andy.